The church was quiet in a way Dean Martin had never known. Not the quiet before applause. Not the quiet between verses. Not even the quiet of a late-night studio when the band had gone home. This was a different silence. It pressed against the walls, settled into the wooden pews, and hung heavy in the air like something that had weight. The kind of silence that doesn't ask to be broken, it dares you to try. Dean stood near the front, his hands folded, his posture straight, his face calm in the way only decades of public life could teach a man to be. To anyone watching, he looked composed, controlled, almost untouched. But inside him, something had already shattered. The casket was closed. He hadn't asked for it to be that way. Someone else had made the decision, quietly, mercifully, because they knew Dean didn't need one more image burned into his memory. He didn't need confirmation. He didn't need proof. He already knew. This was his son. Not a headline. Not a story. Not a tragedy people whispered about in hallways. His son. The boy whose laughter once filled their home. The boy who used to sit on the edge of the piano bench, swinging his legs while Dean played. The boy who believed, with the absolute certainty only children have, that his father could never be broken. Dean's jaw tightened just slightly. No one noticed. He had learned long ago how to keep grief from climbing into his eyes. Fame teaches you that. The world watches, waits, judges, so you build walls, brick by brick, smile by smile. But grief doesn't respect walls. It waits. The pews behind him were filled, family, friends, people from the industry, people who hadn't spoken to Dean in years but felt pulled here by something they couldn't explain. Some came out of loyalty, some out of guilt, some out of curiosity. None of them spoke, because no one knew what to say when the man who once made the world laugh now stood at the center of a room that felt hollow. A soft cough echoed somewhere in the back. Dean breathed in slowly. He had not planned to sing. Everyone assumed he wouldn't. They told him he didn't have to, that no one would expect it, that this wasn't a performance. They were right. This wasn't a performance. This was something else entirely. The minister spoke first. His voice was gentle, careful, as if each word might crack the air if spoken too loudly. He talked about faith, about loss, about love that doesn't disappear when someone leaves this world. Dean listened, but only distantly. His mind was somewhere else. He remembered a night years ago, a small living room, a dim lamp, a young boy sitting cross-legged on the floor. "Sing it again, Dad." Dean had laughed then, pretended to groan, pretended he was tired. But he sang anyway. He always did. That memory rose now, uninvited, and it struck him harder than anything else that day. "Sing it again, Dad." The minister finished. A pause followed long enough for uncertainty to ripple through the room. Then Dean moved. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't announce himself. He simply stepped forward, one slow step at a time, until he stood beside the pulpit. A murmur passed through the pews. Was he really going to? Dean placed one hand on the wood. It was cool, solid, real. He looked out over the room at faces filled with sympathy, curiosity, sorrow, fear. Some people already had tears in their eyes. Dean didn't. "Not yet. I won't be long," he said. His voice was low, steady, almost too steady. "I don't have much to say." That was a lie, but it was the kind of lie grief tells to survive. He paused. Then, without music, without introduction, without warning, he began. The first note came out clean. Clear. Familiar. It surprised everyone, including him. The song was simple, a gospel hymn he had known since childhood, one his mother used to hum in the kitchen, one he had sung countless times without thinking. But today, every word meant something different. The room leaned in. Dean's voice filled the space, warm, resonant, wrapped in decades of mastery. For a moment it felt almost normal, almost safe. Then came the second verse. That's when it happened. His voice cracked. Just once. Barely noticeable to someone who didn't know him. But everyone in that room knew. Dean Martin did not miss notes. He did not stumble. And he did not let the world see him falter. Except now. The sound caught in his throat, sharp and sudden like glass. He stopped singing. Not because he chose to. Because he couldn't go on. The silence returned, heavier than before. Dean lowered his head. His shoulders didn't shake, he didn't cry out, he didn't collapse. But something in his posture changed. The walls were gone. He took a breath. Another. And then quietly, almost as if he were singing only to himself, he finished the song. No one moved. No one clapped. No one even breathed too loudly. Because the room understood something in that moment. This was not a famous man singing. This was a father saying goodbye. And when the final word left his lips, the silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full, the things he never said. The house had never been this quiet. Dean Martin stood alone in the living room long after the funeral ended, long after the cars had disappeared from the driveway, long after the world had politely moved on. The lights were off except for one lamp in the corner, casting a soft yellow glow across furniture that suddenly felt too large for one man. Silence followed him here too. Not the holy silence of the church. This one was sharper, personal. It knew his name. Dean loosened his tie and let it fall onto the chair. The suit still smelled faintly of incense and old wood. He hated that smell now. It reminded him that today was real, that no matter how many stages he had stood on, no curtain was coming down to reset this scene. His son was gone. Not lost. Not away. Gone. Dean walked slowly toward the piano. It stood against the wall like it always had, polished, proud, waiting. For decades it had been his refuge. When the world demanded smiles, the piano listened instead. When words failed him, keys never did. But tonight, it felt like an accusation. He sat down anyway. His fingers hovered above the keys, trembling just slightly. He hadn't noticed until now how tired his hands felt, not physically, something deeper, as if they had carried more than music all these years. He pressed one key. The note rang out, sharp in the quiet room. Dean flinched. He hadn't expected it to hurt. He closed the lid gently and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His breath slowed, then caught. A memory rose, uninvited, vivid, relentless. His son was 16. Too old to be a child, too young to be sure of anything. They had argued that night. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make a movie scene. Just words said too quickly, too casually, as if they didn't matter. "I don't want to live in your shadow," his son had said. Dean had laughed. Not cruelly, not intentionally. But the sound had landed wrong. "What shadow?" Dean replied. "You've got everything ahead of you." His son didn't answer. He just stood there, jaw tight, eyes searching his father's face for something Dean didn't know he was supposed to give. Dean remembered turning away first. He told himself he was tired, that tomorrow would be better, that there would be time. There is always time until there is. The lamp flickered slightly. Dean straightened. For a brief, irrational moment, he thought he heard footsteps. He held his breath. Nothing. Just the hum of the house settling. Just memory playing tricks on a man who had lost the one person he never imagined losing. Dean stood and walked toward the hallway. Every door was closed. Except one. His son's room. It had been untouched. No one had suggested cleaning it. No one dared, as if opening that door too soon would make the loss irreversible. Dean reached for the handle. His hand stopped inches away. This door held everything he had avoided for years: drawings, notebooks, unfinished thoughts, questions never asked. Proof that his son had lived a life Dean had only partially witnessed. Dean exhaled and pushed the door open. The room smelled faintly of paper and dust, and something unmistakably youthful. That strange mix of hope and confusion that only belongs to the young. The bed was neatly made. Too neat. On the desk sat a small stack of notebooks. Dean recognized them immediately. His son used to write late at night, pretending it was homework whenever Dean walked by. "I'm just thinking," he'd say. Dean smiled sadly now. He picked up the top notebook. The first pages were harmless. Lyrics, ideas, random lines, nothing alarming, nothing obvious. Dean almost felt relieved. Then he turned another page. The handwriting changed. Messier, faster. I don't know how to talk to him. Dean's chest tightened. Everyone thinks he's always strong, always joking, but I don't know how to reach him when he goes quiet. Dean sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. I wish he would ask me how I'm really doing. The words blurred. Dean had asked thousands of people how they were doing over the years. Fans, friends, strangers. But not enough the one person who needed it most. Another page. I know he loves me. I just wish he would say it when the lights are off. Dean closed the notebook. The room tilted slightly. This was the danger of silence. It convinces you that love is obvious, that it doesn't need to be spoken. That presence alone is enough. Sometimes it is. Dean stared at the wall where a faded poster still hung. Something his son had loved once, something Dean never really asked about. He had been there, but he hadn't always been present. The realization didn't come as a scream. It came quietly, settled into him, stayed. Dean stood and walked back into the hallway, carrying the notebook like something fragile. He returned to the living room and placed it gently on the piano. For the first time since the funeral, his eyes burned. He didn't wipe them. He didn't fight it. A single tear slipped down his cheek, unnoticed by anyone but him. Dean Martin had spent a lifetime performing strength. But strength, he was learning too late, was never about being unbreakable. It was about being open, before silence had a chance to grow roots. He looked at the piano again. This time he opened it. His fingers found the keys, uncertain at first, then steadier. He began to play not a song anyone would recognize, just a sequence of notes. Slow, searching, honest. It wasn't for an audience. It wasn't for memory. It was for the words he never said. And as the music filled the room, something shifted. The silence didn't leave. But it changed. It listened, the letter no one was meant to read. The music stopped on its own. Dean Martin hadn't decided to stop playing. His fingers simply slowed, then froze, as if they no longer trusted the next note. The final sound lingered in the air before dissolving into the room's stillness. He sat there unmoving. The notebook rested on the piano like a quiet witness. Dean stared at it for a long time before touching it again. He already knew what it contained, or at least he thought he did. Thoughts, feelings, confessions meant for no one. That's when he noticed it. A folded piece of paper tucked into the back cover. It hadn't fallen out. It had been placed there deliberately. Dean's pulse quickened. He hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect. There are some things you instinctively know you're not ready to see. Some truths wait until the soul has been stripped of its defenses. Slowly, he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Steadier than the rest, careful, as if every word had been chosen, then reconsidered. Dad. Dean stopped breathing. He read that single word again. Dad. The word carried more weight now than any applause he had ever received. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm not even sure I want you to. Dean swallowed. But if you do, I need you to know something before anything else. The room felt smaller. I never doubted that you loved me, not once. Dean's hands began to shake. I doubted whether you believed I mattered outside the applause. The sentence landed harder than any accusation could have. Dean lowered himself onto the couch, the letter trembling between his fingers. He continued reading. People see you as fearless, untouchable, like nothing ever reaches you. But I saw the quiet moments, the nights when the laughter faded, the way you stared into space like you were somewhere else. Dean closed his eyes. He had never realized he was being watched that closely. I wanted to ask you what scared you. I wanted to know if you ever felt alone in rooms full of people. A long breath escaped Dean's chest. But every time I thought about it, I remembered how busy you were being strong. Strong. That word again. It followed him everywhere, in interviews, in reviews, in expectations. He had worn it like armor, never questioning the cost. So I learned how to be quiet too. Dean's vision blurred. The letter continued, relentless in its honesty. I thought if I didn't make noise, I wouldn't be a burden. If I didn't ask, I wouldn't disappoint you. I thought love was proven by not needing it spoken. Dean pressed the paper to his chest. The irony cut deep. He had believed the same thing. A sudden sound echoed from the hallway. Dean's head snapped up. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Impossible. His heart pounded as he stared toward the dark corridor. Hello, he called softly. No answer. The house was still. Dean exhaled shakily, embarrassed by his own imagination. Grief does that, it makes ghosts out of memory and hope out of habit. He looked back down at the letter. If I could change one thing, Dad, it wouldn't be the arguments. It would be the silence between them. Tears spilled freely now. Dean didn't wipe them away. I wish I had known how to knock on your door without feeling like I was interrupting your life. The words cut through him like a blade wrapped in velvet. He had always told himself that providing was love, protecting was love, giving space was love. But space, left unattended, becomes distance. If you ever feel guilty reading this, please don't. Dean stiffened. This isn't goodbye. He read the line twice. This is me finally talking. Dean leaned forward, elbows on his knees, shoulders hunched, smaller now, older. The letter ended simply. I love you, even when we don't say it. Your son. Dean lowered the paper slowly. The house felt different now, heavier, but clearer, like fog lifting to reveal damage you hadn't wanted to see. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, indifferent to human sorrow. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed, life continuing unaware. Dean rested his hand against the glass. He realized then that his son hadn't been asking for answers. He had been asking for permission, to be seen, to be unsure, to be human. Dean had spent a lifetime teaching others how to feel through music. But he had forgotten to teach his own son that silence wasn't the price of love. A knock echoed suddenly. Sharp. Real. Dean turned, heart racing. Another knock. This time closer, firmer. He moved slowly toward the door, his mind racing with impossible thoughts. When he opened it, there was no one there. Just a small package on the floor. No note. No return address. Dean stared down at it, confusion replacing grief. He picked it up. Inside was an old cassette tape. Handwritten on the label were 3 words. For Dad, please listen. Dean's breath caught. He understood then. The conversation wasn't over. Not yet, the song he never finished. Dean Martin did not turn on the lights. He stood in the doorway, the small cassette resting in his palm, as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. The house felt different now, not quieter but aware, as though the walls themselves were waiting. He walked back to the piano. The tape player sat on a shelf beneath it, untouched for years. Dean hadn't used it in ages. He brushed dust away with his sleeve, then paused. This was it. Once he pressed play, there would be no pretending this night hadn't changed him. Dean sat down. For the first time since the funeral, his hands were unsteady enough that he noticed. He inserted the tape. The click echoed louder than it should have. Silence. Then a soft hiss. Static. Dean leaned forward. And then he heard it. His son's voice. Not the confident voice people used in public, not the careful voice of family dinners. This one was quieter, younger, honest in a way that made Dean's chest tighten instantly. Hi, Dad, if you're listening to this, it means I finally worked up the courage to leave it where you'd find it. Dean closed his eyes. The voice continued. I didn't know how to say some of these things out loud. Every time I tried, the words felt too big, so I thought maybe if I recorded them, they'd stop chasing me. Dean pressed his lips together. I know you're always telling people not to be afraid of silence. You say it's where the real music lives. A faint laugh followed. I guess I took that too seriously. Dean's breath caught. The tape played on. There's something I never told you. Not because it was a secret, but because I didn't know how to make it sound important enough. Dean leaned back, staring at the ceiling. When you sang, Dad, it made people feel seen, even when they didn't understand why. A pause. I used to sit backstage sometimes. I didn't want anyone to notice me, so I stayed quiet, but I watched their faces, the way they softened, the way some of them cried without knowing why. Dean swallowed hard. That's when I realized something. The voice hesitated. I didn't want to be famous. I didn't want applause. I just wanted to learn how to make someone feel less alone, the way you did. Dean's shoulders shook. For the first time that night, he didn't try to stop it. I guess I was waiting for you to tell me that was enough. The tape hissed softly between words. I know now that you loved me. I really do. I just wish we had talked more when things were quiet. Dean covered his mouth with his hand. I hope someday you forgive yourself for the things you didn't say, because I already did. The words struck him like a breaking wave. The voice softened. If you ever sing again, Dad, sing the way you did when it was just us. No crowd, no lights, just truth. A final pause. I love you. Click. The tape stopped. Dean didn't move. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was full of presence. He sat there for a long time, tears streaming freely now, unashamed, unhidden. Not the tears of regret alone, but of understanding. Dean Martin had spent his life believing that strength meant carrying weight without letting it show. But his son had taught him something different. Strength was letting love be heard, even when your voice cracked. Dean reached for the piano. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He played. The melody was slow, unfinished, imperfect. It wavered, it paused, it breathed. It wasn't a song meant for an audience. It was a conversation. He sang quietly, not with the voice that filled theaters, but with the one that trembled when no one was watching. A father's voice. When the final note faded, Dean rested his hands on the keys and whispered words he had waited too long to say. I hear you. Outside, dawn began to creep across the sky, soft, patient, forgiving. Dean stayed where he was as the light grew. The music had ended, but the silence no longer scared him, because now it spoke back.